So welcome everyone, I'm Superly Good. I'm the curator here at the Penobscot Bay Museum, and Nancy Morgan-Barnes and I have been talking about this exhibit at least 4 years.
Yes.
And so it was a no-brainer to ask Carl Little to guest curate the show. Carl, as you may know, is coming out with a new book called Paintings of Penobscot Bay, due this fall from Islandport Press. But he's also written a bunch of art books, Edward Hopper, John Singer Sargent, Francis Hamabe, Joel Babb, and Eric Hopkins. So definitely earns his right as an art critic here in Maine. And so we're so happy that you agreed to do this and take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could all come out. It's such a nice early June evening, but I wanted to thank the executive director, Karen Smith, and Superly, who is actually officially the Richard Saltonstall Jr. Curator of Maritime History at this museum, for their encouragement and enthusiasm and helping to bring this show together. As Superly mentioned, this was originally thought to be a bicentennial show 2 years ago, and then you know what happened. And so when they contacted me this past fall and said, "Would you like to revive the show?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. I love this group of artists. Let's go back into gear." And all 14 artists signed on again, which was wonderful. And almost all of the work was still available that I had selected for the original show. So that worked out really well. And I want to thank them all for participating, including bringing your work here, which in April, which I know some people were coming from different parts of Maine, had to make special arrangements to do that. So, and then a special thanks to our three panelists this evening, Nancy Morgan-Barnes in the middle, Jill Hoy, and Colin Page. All three are, in my humble opinion, brilliant interpreters of Penobscot Bay. And I think that their answer to my first question will be a means of introducing themselves to you. So I will get right onto it. Each of you came to Maine. They've seen the questions already, so they're going to act surprised. I mean, if I said, what are the 39 steps, then I could really get them going. But, so each of you came to Maine and to Penobscot Bay from other places at different times in your life. So I thought it would be fun to start off by asking you to describe your journey here and your first impressions of Penobscot Bay. And I thought we might start with Jill. I think you came here the earliest of the three.
Yeah. So my family moved around a lot. My dad was in higher education and he was at Wesleyan, and a lot of the literature department had houses in Stonington and islands off the coast. And we rented one of those islands, Lazy Gut, and Dad rode around to Stonington, was shown all the real estate on the island, and the next year the New York Times put out an article, everything sold but a huge old ship captain's house that he bought for $7,000. And that's where I grew up summering, and I was very held by the island, and with a fairly constant movement in the other part of my life, that became my stable zone, and it really educated me to its speed and its passion. It's such a powerful bay. And so my first impressions, August used to be solid fog, and kitchen mittens on the shore, and how big people's hands were, and the accents were incredible, and the stories were amazing. And the artist community was phenomenal. At that point in the mid-60s, pretty much the only people in addition to fishermen were artists, and they were really good. So I grew up listening to a lot of the main greats in that locale, and they're pretty seminal to my development and what I hold at the age of 67. It's interesting how we synthesize information and where they stand in the articulation of my work now.
Yeah, thanks. Nancy?
Oh, okay. I moved here a little over 20 years ago from Indiana, and both my husband and I were academics, and then we left the university and came here to paint. And so I live right here on Route 1, and you look out the window and there's the bay. And one of my objectives was I was more or less a studio painter, and I wanted to really get out, and so there it was. And it was difficult. The idea of that kind of elegance and beauty but I did discover Mac Point and the dock where there was life and energy and the sort of the human involvement in the bay, and that really interested me, and that's where I sort of really found my connection. And I also met Stefan Pasterhoff, who really helped me become much more of a plein air painter, because I didn't really quite know how to do it. Thank you. So that's pretty much it.
What was your work like before you came to
It was mostly interiors and still lifes and figures.
Yeah, so this is just...
And it was a real concerted effort to get out.
Yeah.
And I was becoming studio stale, I thought.
Yeah.
You just need more information, and this really helped.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many stories of artists coming here
That's right.
that were essentially abstract artists,
Right.
who just could not resist what was around them. I mean, Marguerite Zorak, the Zoraks, I think of, you know, I mean, she ended up doing some wonderful Maine landscapes. I mean, just because it was there, you know, and she really felt compelled to.
Right, but I could never do the quiet or the pastoral, the bucolic.
Thank God.
But it's...
Yeah, so Colin, how did you come to Maine and the Bay? And
Yeah, so I was living in Brooklyn, New York, and just a few years out of college, and a friend moved up to Maine, and my lease was up, and I knew I just wanted to get somewhere quieter and more affordable and a lot more nature. So I followed him up here kind of on a whim, with figuring it'd be a 6-month winter rental, and I loved everything about being in Maine. I had no experience with the state at all before then, and didn't realize how much of a history of art there was really based in Maine. I knew the artists, but I hadn't put together how many paintings were actually done up here. And it was really, it was inspiring moving here from Brooklyn, from kind of the art college scene, where there was everyone was creative, but when I got here, I felt like people were actually doing things with their hands. They were actually making things, whether it was knitting or painting or making sculptures. It felt like everybody I met here they weren't just talking about it, they were actually doing interesting things. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the main things that made me want to stay here. And my first real impact with the Bay was, as a plein air painter, I was blown away by the views from the tops of the mountains in the Camden Hills, looking out over the bay. So I would haul my gear to the top of Maiden's Cliff and Mount Batty. I was always hiking up those places, because I mostly grown up in the mid-Atlantic, where the ocean's flat, the beach is flat, it's just, it's all horizon. And to get up there and see this really dynamic coastal scene with all the islands from above was stunning to me.
yeah, like that Millet experience. And
Yeah.
I turned and there they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
What was your work like before?
I'd started doing I was only a couple years out of college, and in college I was a mess. I was doing all kinds of, just mostly bad paintings and trying to figure out what I was doing. Yeah, right. And then actually getting out of college is when I started doing plein air paintings, because I wanted to be outside and I wanted to paint, and I felt like there was this challenge in college, like what's your body of work about, and how, I just wanted to paint.
Right.
So being outside was an excuse to just go respond to what you're looking at and paint, and falling into the sort of impressionist landscape idea, it was sort of an easy way to just play with color. And I feel like I learned a lot. I learned just as much from that experience as I had in college about actually like your language as a painter.
I know that you became a sailor too, which
Yeah.
led to a lot of other things.
Yes, recently, yeah, that was it took me about 15 years of living here to get the guts to buy a sailboat and start going to the ocean. But yeah, it's one of the best things about living in Maine on the coast is the access to, once you start getting on the water, the landscape feels like it doubles in size. There's so many great views from the water, so many islands to explore, you know, it's been really inspiring to have that added in.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I'd like to turn to the work that you have in this show. And actually, if we could, we'll reverse the order. And Colin, if you wouldn't mind starting, one of the constants in your work is the waterfront at Camden. You painted that numerous occasions, and I'm just wondering what draws you there. I also remember when I interviewed you for the article on Maine Boats, Homes, and Harbors that you mentioned something. I think it was you said something about being intimidated about painting a boat.
Right. Yeah. So when I moved here from living in New York, and my mother had a house, I'd spend the summers at the beach in New Jersey. I was on the water a fair amount, but I'd never painted or drawn a boat once. And so I ended up in Camden Harbor, and all there are boats. And so I sort of took on the challenge of learning to get comfortable with the forms and shapes and lines. It's pretty complicated, the perspective on all the curves of a boat. But I found that I really loved that challenge, and also it's more fun to paint. I find a lot more fun to paint the boats having some kind of like a still life in the water instead of just these big open landscapes, because there's something for the light sort of bounce around and the water to bounce off of. There's more interaction to play with visually for me. So that was one of the fun things about moving to Camden, was taking on the full harbor. You know, Camden is a very crowded harbor, but there's, you find these, I love going down there and finding these little moments within it. And it is, as I've gotten sort of further along, early on I was trying to travel a lot and paint a lot of different landscapes, going to the Southwest and kind of just trying to figure out how to paint all these different types of landscape. And lately I'm enjoying a lot more being closer to home and just kind of revisiting these same places and these same scenes, and having yesterday morning I was painting in Camden, and these fishermen come down that I know, and then, we see each other a lot. It's sort of a weird pairing, me out there with my easel and the fishermen walking by, and now we tease each other and it's fun having these relationships.
What are they calling it?
Well, it's not. They more to give me a hard time about making money too easily. You just show up here, paint for a few hours, and you got to go work for a living, which to me is fair.
True.
Yeah.
I'm curious about this particular painting. Where is that? Is that one of the boatyards?
So it's Night Marine in Rockland, which is where I keep my sailboat. And that's another one of the kind of nice things about this introduction to the waterfront. I used to be so intimidated I thought the sailing community was going to be a little closed off and stuffy, and I thought the lobstermen in the working harbor, this working marina would be a bunch of guys like these lobstermen who wouldn't want me around.
Right.
But if you smile and you're around all the time, they sort of take you in. So this marina, I'd already been painting there for years when they started storing my boat. And they were really proud when the first time I went in to sign the storage contract, they had one of my postcards on the wall.
Nice.
And next to the cash register, we know you.
That's a true badge of honor.
Yeah, I was so proud. Yeah.
And just personally, I published a poem once about taking my Saab to the Prompto dealer, and I went in there one day, and they had the poem up on the wall. I have made it.
Yeah.
I don't need anything more. I don't need the Pulitzer.
Yeah.
That's
This
it.
is it. Yeah.
Except
It'd be nice too.
Yeah. Nancy, tell us about your work in the show. There are several of us who are dying to know about the incident at the bridge.
Yes.
Well, that's,
Switch to that.
when the bridge was going up.
There it is.
That was how many? 10 years ago? More, 12.
Yeah.
About 12 years ago. So I was down there, as I said before, that I liked that kind of energy, that activity with the landscape. And so Stefan and I went down there a couple of times. This would be the third time on the other side of the bridge that I painted it. And I did push things back. and it's a fairly large painting, so I kept pushing the actual painting back. And I had this foreground, and I do like what I'm painting to be kind of a setting, and then the rest of like a theater.
Yeah.
And so I can create this animation in front of it, and
Right.
and there were all these, and this never happened, but just seem to sort of start to fall into place, these people, and then it got a little bit out of hand.
That's where it gets good.
It does get good.
So is that Bob there?
No,
No, okay.
it's some invention.
Yeah, just an invention, yeah. I mean, I love I think someone, maybe it was me, said something, once described some of your work as being like fractured fables.
Right.
I'm thinking Nancy has a wonderful painting of a moose wandering down the main street of Searsport.
That's right.
And whenever I drive through, I go, where is that? But this one, the dog, and there's often, if you could show the other painting, there's often a bird, the seagulls often seem to be activated.
They do.
Yeah.
And you can put them anywhere. So you
Yeah,
can.
so this is. I was making some in the sand the other day. Easy to do. This is Belfast, Harvard?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what Colin was saying about painting where there are people, and it's just, there is this delight where they do come up to you. I think a lot of times you just disappear. They don't see you after a while. But a lot of times they will come up to you and talk to you about what you're doing. And for the most part, it's really fun to make those kind of overtures and talk to them. And they're always interested. And if you're painting them or what they're doing, you learn a lot more. And it sort of, I think it elevates the engagement.
Yeah.
In painting.
Yeah, I love the tilt of the boat in there. There's a lot going on in that painting.
And
it's interesting, as you go through the show, the historical section has some of these ship portraits that were very popular. The owners of the ships would have a well-known artist paint the portrait of the ship. And where we are today, I mean, it's a very different kind of thing. It's more real.
It is.
Yes. I guess that.
But this is an
Jill.
imagined, I'd just like to say, this is an imagined Belfast scene, because we don't have those.
No, but I started it. I started it there.
That's
and
okay.
Then
It's okay.
I
find that
did add
fascinating. Yeah.
the
But I love those lines back and forth, and then those two guys.
fishing boat. Yeah.
Because it's great.
Yeah. Jill, your pieces, I mean, you've already talked about your attachment to Stonington. You are so attached to that place. And many of the paintings have sort of specific place names in the titles. And I just was wondering sort of how you go about, whether it's was it Bateman Barons and then this one of the Dories. What is it that kind of grabs you?
It's usually structural first. I think compositionally often first, but also I'm pretty interested in time and history and sort of what feels archetypal in terms of time and what's leaving us quickly with gentrification. So what feels timeless.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're rescuing the waterfront in a lot of ways. I mean, it's disappearing so rapidly. Some of your paintings, probably some of those sites are.
We're lucky to still have them.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that fog thing, because the water used to be colder, and so with the warm air, you'd get just weeks of fog, but we don't get that anymore. August is clear as a bell, generally speaking. And of course, the lobstering is going to head north, down east. And I don't know how fast that's going to happen, but it'll decimate the local population. And I was thinking about, this. I used to be told by the locals, well, lobstermen are top dog, and then you've got the clammers, and you've got the wormers, and then you've got the artists.
There's the hierarchy right there.
Yeah, we were low. But people, painting is magic, and people love watching it. And then they always tell you about Bob Ross. It is so funny. They always talked about him.
Tell us about Bob.
I know. Only Bob.
I know he's a great collector.
Oh, not Bob Ross, Bob, you know, the guy on public television.
Oh,
Yeah.
Do you want to hear about Bob Ross?
yeah. Ross, yeah,
Look
sure.
at that, trees.
Oh,
Yeah.
but, so, the Boyces have had the dories and the herring for generation after generation in Stonington. And they're all, you know, the herring's almost gone. We don't get them anymore, the sardines. But he still goes out with these dories, and it's so timeless. You know, you look at the museum here and those beautiful boats out in the buildings. Number one, I love form. You know, I grew up in an antique dealer's family, and form is big time in my life. And those boats and how they reflect. And this was done quite a few years ago also, when it was mostly fishermen on that lineup. Now it's a restaurant and summer people, and the docks are filled with kayaks, and you know, and it's highly tidal, so they're all ground out on mud flats. But those are the, you know, the nets in the boats. And now his son is doing it, and they're down in Oceanville, and you can see him in Hatches Cove, strung out. And
Oh, I love that, when they're
it's
strung
just
out
a
like that.
beautiful, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful sight.
Did you paint that on site,
All my paintings are done on site, yeah.
except in the winter where you do more?
Then I do figurative narratives that are kind of surreal, but based on scenarios I saw that just, you know, that's the seed, and you let them rip and see where you end up. And, like, fancy
You know, some of when you're painting a cloud or these forms, you do seem to have a calligraphy, like,
yes.
and that's really interesting. You know, you didn't have it like that way, you know, 30 years ago.
Yeah, right. I really want the velocity and the power. Like rocks, clouds, and water are all really hard to figure out. How are you going to deal with them? How are you going to take the experiential notation of what you're looking at and get it down? And so it's a kind of gestural calligraphy that I have far more freedom in my work now than I used to. It used to be much more pure documentation. And now I want it to be that kind of sensorial, just hitting the river and going with it and just synthesizing whatever, all this knowledge that we have from looking at art and other people's art and the environment. I'm letting go. I'm trying to make the most of my last 20 years.
Could we show the other one of Jill's? Yeah, that one. Where is that from?
This is Bakeman Beach down in Cape Roja, which, you know, the other thing, of course, as we all know about the Penobscot Bay is there's hundreds of islands and constellations of them, as well as the rock formations are incredible in my area anyway. And and one of my favorite things are those currents that move across the bays, and how the light shatters it. So this, and then you get the blueberry barrens in the fall, which are so full of rhythms and color and chaos, and you're finding the structures. You know, this one comes in and it goes out, and it just
And the light on the water
yeah.
just changes so
People love
much.
those dots.
So do you.
Oh, I love
those dots.
Yeah,
dazzle. Oh,
yeah.
Bling.
You're bling.
yeah.
Well, this is great. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and we talked a little bit about it already, but about the community of artists in Maine. And I know that the origin of the show really came out of Nancy, you going out and painting with Stefan and Scott and others.
Right, right.
And it seemed to me like just this wonderful sense of camaraderie, and I just was wondering if each of you could sort of give an example of that, of how you see that as part of the Maine, you know, your artist community. I think that's my main community foundation voice,
Maybe.
looking through a community lens. But
Well, I also draw every week, and there's this great, and I think you do too. You do.
I did, that's how we met, actually.
Right.
15 years ago.
So there's, and
Where is that?
painting-
Where's that?
Waterfall.
At Waterfall,
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen you guys,
Right.
yeah, I live near, right near there.
So I've been drawing every week at Waterfall Arts since I moved here 20, well, it wasn't Waterfall. We moved it around Dudley's Up and various places.
Oh, right.
And finally landed at Waterfall and stayed. But you work alone. I mean, even if you're outside and people come by, you really are in yourself, in your head, and there's nothing collaborative about what you do. You're there, you're doing it, you're finishing it, and you hope it's okay. But working with a figure, with all these people scrubbing away, there's something that feels much more collaborative and like a community of artists. And also coming from an academic tradition where even though you have a department, you have a lot of other faculties, members, and you're all working for the students, that's what you're supposed to be doing.
right.
But there's a sense of real fierce competition, and I didn't feel that here. I felt more friendly,
Yeah.
even though there are people are vying for sales and things like that, which you don't want to keep everything unique.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it felt much more open and friendly.
Well, I love the idea of you all going out together too to
Yes,
paint.
right,
I mean, I think you both.
They all
At
like
that
these
point,
beautiful places, and I just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was hard. I needed them.
I
Another
did
great,
it.
another landscape.
Another beautiful
man
place.
landscape,
Oh,
Bill.
God. Kidding.
I wrote recently about Lois Dodd and Jeff Epstein, and they do this. They just go out, they get in the car in Cushing and drive off, and they've done a lot of work in Rockland and that, and it's basically just going along, seeing what attracts them. And,
Right.
And then to see the work that they both did at the same place is really cool.
Mm.
Really cool. Jill, what about the community in Stonington, the artist community? I mean, you
Well, first and foremost, I totally agree with what Nancy said. It's a very solitary profession. I mean, it is. I know. And I was married to one of the great painters of America, and so we had a lot of dialogue about John Inberg. We talked a lot. And then I also think about this community of artists that I grew up around. Everyone would go into their studios or they were mostly studio painters, but they'd draw on site. And you'd come together at dinner parties or gatherings, and everyone was talking then. But in the studio, it was solitary. You wouldn't go out painting. Nancy and I have talked about going to the Blue Hill Fair for years,
Right,
and
yeah.
we haven't done it. And it just hasn't happened. So I don't really. We have Haystack School of Arts and Crafts, and that's brought a lot of artisans. A lot of artists have been priced out of the area real estate-wise, unless, they have. And it's usually fundraisers where you get to see the other artists, Colin does a fundraiser for the Camden Library, and that's where I see most of my peers. Hurricane Island, Cape Elizabeth. So the serious art connections, I don't get them very much.
But we were talking earlier at the opening about how you met John at Carl
Carl
Schrag.
Schrag's, well, yeah. I mean, because I have these dialogues and memories in my head of those days when there really was a very viable, strong bunch of artists. And I loved listening. And I still, hear things. And the rapturous talk about the Penobscot Bay and its light was a big topic of conversation. And as a kid, you think, light? What are they talking about? But, I grew into a major understanding of it. What did you just ask me?
No, I was just mentioning Carl Schrag.
Oh, yeah. Which,
I mean-
speaking gesturally, I think of Carl Schrag a lot.
Yeah.
It shows.
Yeah, thanks.
It shows, and the way you capture light as a form is just, it's part of your vocabulary, the light.
Right, yeah.
One of the great thrills of our lives as a family was being invited down by Carl for the end of the season showing, in his barn.
Yes.
And he had all the paintings against the wall, and he would just turn one at each time, and we were just like, it was such a privilege, but it was like being shown the
And working,
The
he had
greatness
this
and-
wonderful barn, and he'd just invite curators and artists and friends, and we'd all come, and that's where I met my husband. And it was very civilized, that pacing and
kind of old
seeing-
world in a way too. I mean, he was
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
so generous with everything. Yeah. And Colin, you have a community through your gallery in
Yeah.
Camden, and so many wonderful artists, Annalise, some of these people that I've just started to learn about. And
Yeah, I think the community of artists in Maine, that's one of the reasons, like I was saying earlier, when I moved here, I felt like that I was meeting more creative people than I had in New York. And it was that community that I found so enriching, even though, like you said, I would then go out and paint. And, even when I for a while painted with people pretty regularly. I think one of the funny things about the plein air world is plein air painters tend to go out in groups and paint in these, so there'll be 4 or 5 people, it'll just be texting, which harbor are you gonna go to today, which farm, and then everyone kind of shows up and paints and sometimes teases each other a little in the breaks, but you're stuck in your own head where you're painting. But then afterwards, I learned a lot about art supplies like easels, different paint brands, colors to try out. Even talking about galleries. Before I was a gallery, they would talk to me about galleries. And just finding out who was fun to work with, and it was really a great resource to have all of that. And then really, once I opened the gallery, it's been really interesting because I feel like I've lived here for 20 years and the gallery is only 3 years old. So that first 17 years, I knew a lot of, I had met both of you, but I've never been to either of your studios. But now that I have the gallery, all these artists I meet, I'm constantly being invited into studios and I'm having these really interesting conversations about their work and seeing their spaces. And you go into enough artist studios and you can tell what this person's space and personality are going to be like, because they match so well. You start noticing there's the very put together people when you go and they have this gorgeous, perfectly pristine studio, or you go into Gideon Bach's studio and it's a mess, but it's the most beautiful mess you've ever seen. And so the gallery has been a really good way to connect with even collectors. Most of the people we go visit, even to hang art in their home, they have a studio in their garage. There's always, everyone up here is doing something fun. And it's a real treat to be able to have the conversations that I'd been showing and talking to artists at all these openings, but I was not actually I wasn't going to see their work where they make it. And that's a real reward to owning the gallery.
yeah, that's been a great perk for me too, as writing about artists, is going to their homes and hearing what they're up to, and it's like a special key to another world.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I have to ask the requisite COVID question, and that is, how has the pandemic affected your work, or has it or not, or
It was
are you?
great.
Just cut out all the extraneous. It was just about work. It was good. I like.
Were you lonesome?
I had a friend who was doing a lot of carpentry for me, and he was smart and funny, and that was my pod. So that was just enough to get me through. And I garden a lot, so people walking by on the street, and I have a gallery, so it was an amazing 2 years of selling art. I mean, people were ready to pull the trigger on, and that was totally a surprise.
pleasant surprise. Yeah, it was pretty scary in the beginning though. That when we first shut down for a couple of months, I thought, who's ever going to buy a painting again? The world was ending. And then summer hit. It's like they're all buying paintings. This is fantastic.
Yeah, you're home.
Yeah.
You want something to enliven your life, and
Yeah.
I'll go for a Hawaii.
Yeah.
You can't go to Hawaii, I'll buy a show.
Yeah.
That's true.
But I was also wondering whether it affected, your work, the work itself. I mean, there's a, I do a fair amount of reading in contemporary poetry, and every new volume now usually has a little COVID sequence or one or two poems that reference masks or,
Yeah.
but
Did your figures start wearing
Well,
masks?
no, but everybody, I like to draw when I draw, I like to draw the whole group, and everybody else, the model's there, but everybody else has masks on.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then I did have a show of the drawings at Smith College, and it went up February 14th, and then Smith College closed the next week. And it's like, Alan Crichton called those ghost shows. Just went down, they went up, they went down.
Yeah.
So that was a disappointment.
yeah,
But as far as like imagery, you think,
Yeah.
my imagery didn't really change. I had more time.
yeah, yeah. Fewer distractions.
Yeah, there's nothing, no one could come over, could do anything.
Got a lot of block done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think mine actually did change a little. The landscapes, there's just the normal sort of evolution of trying to figure out colors and how to capture light, the normal sort of progression. But in the winter, I tend to do a series of still lives, and they'd all been, they ended up becoming more about I was, locked down with at the beginning, a 7 and 9-year-old. Or I guess 6 and 8 at the very, very beginning. And so the tabletop still lives I was doing turned into a mess of crafts, occasional cocktails, the books we were reading, children's books, adult books, and it sort of turned into this family still life that before they'd been, I'd do a formal lobster dinner. I try to set up this fun, colorful still life. It was always more of a typical tabletop scene. But our tabletop was a mess, and I figured I loved, at one point I looked down, I was like, this watercolor set with the knitting and the dirty plates and my bourbon at night, I was like, this would be a fun painting. So I've stuck with that, and I really like how that's
More autobiographical?
Yeah, before I was building scenes I was interested in, but now it feels like I'm painting my life. It's as much of a portrait of my life as when I paint the kids on an island. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a nice segue to my last question, which is, what are you all working on now, in addition to tabletop still life?
Yeah. Those are on hold. Those are winter. And those are when I can't get outside because I'm not as I used to, but I don't go out in the winter anymore. Plein air painting. So they're my. I still want to paint from life and have some fun subjects to work from. But I do another just sort of a little attached to the previous question, but one of the things that COVID also got me to do was when we were first shut down and the kids weren't in school, we got on my boat a lot more often, and we started going to islands, and I became a much better sailor during COVID than I was before, because all of a sudden we had a lot of time for the boat.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, in the summer I do step back from painting. It always used to be summer, but I'd just do all the plein air painting I could,
Right.
and then winter I'd quiet down. But now at the gallery, I'm either with the kids or at the gallery a lot of the time. So we go on our adventures, and I take a ton of photos, and I'm sort of collecting material for the winter series. And then just occasionally I get a few hours to sneak out with the easel.
Yeah, good.
Well, Bob had a stroke a year and a half ago, so
Yeah.
my time has become really finite, when before I had a lot more time. And so I'm doing a lot more work from photography, which I guess is a big no-no for plein air painters, but it does help. I mean, it's a lot of information, it's very specific information, and I'm a good embellisher, so it's not any, even if I was going out there and painting directly from life, I probably would embellish them anyway. So basically it's much more photographic.
Oh, okay. Artistic license?
I guess so.
Yeah. Jill, how about you?
I'm in the garden a lot right now. So I'll probably start, there's certain ritual times of year that I like to, I'll do a hoop and painting and some poppies and,
Right.
But I'm basically looking at what's calling me, and I'm still looking, I'm not sure what, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to open it up to questions from folks, but I also wanted to recognize the other artists here who are in the show. David Dewey back there, and Stefan, raise your hand. And is there?
Scott.
Scott.
Scott's here.
Oh, there you go. Okay, good. First time I've met some of these folks, so thank you to you too. And I'd be glad to hear from you all too, your thoughts about painting Penobscot Bay, and anybody has any questions about the show or the exhibition or the...
Well, I got to paint with Stapleton ferns for years, every day. And Stapleton's a real character. And he was happy to try to tell me what to do. I didn't listen that often, but it was good to paint with him. Really good. And, he would always, at around 3:30, say, "Are you ready to come back tomorrow?" And I go, "Well, it's a different day. The light will be different, tide will be in a different place." So I was always, a prima, do the whole painting that day. Maybe, tweak the clouds and put my name on it. That was about it. No photographs. Colin's just out there, he knows. At least the way pictures I take doesn't look like where I was when I took the pictures.
Right. Thanks. Scott, you want to...
I don't know, I work in a lot of different ways. I work on location sometimes, I work in the studio quite a bit. I embroider things, I do little sketches on location, come back and work on the studio. I almost never finish anything on location. I take it back and look at it. I don't design that well. Shooting from the hip, I have to move things around and slice and dice a bit really after I've started with them.
Yeah, you both cover quite a territory, seems to me. The islands.
Oh yeah, we used to go to Vermont in the winter and paint in Jeffersonville, Alden Bryan Gallery up there. Got to paint with some famous Rockport artists. We still go up there, a lot of the winter. That's always fun. You get to paint with Paul Strisek a couple of times, and I always admire his work, and he was a character. Yeah, it's just nice being outside.
Yeah. And David, you're in Port Clyde, and
No, I'm now saying.
I mean Alsat. Sorry. Yeah.
That's close.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I was thinking of your painting in the show, Port Clyde.
Is it? Marshall Point, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember what
But
it's for the show.
the first one, the large one, is Port Clyde, I think. Right?
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Oh, with the moon coming out, right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And that evolved out of a number of small paintings that I did over the years on location. And it was typical of the way I work, where outside goes inside. So I've mostly done very large watercolors when I was showing in New York in the 80s and 90s. So I first came to Maine through my friend and mentor Joe Fiore back in the 60s. And then we moved into our area where we are now because of our other friend Lois Todd. They were both friends, and so it was a very nice group that we had. Lois is 95 now, on her way back to Maine.
Nice.
Back to her little spot in Cushing.
Amazing. Any questions from folks? We have one in the back here.
So everyone since Fitzhenry Lane and the church and those guys have been attracted to the Bay. So what do you think has been attracting people for at least 150 years? And are there artists that attracts you, that you sort of draw from their work from the past?
Well, John Singer Sargent was up here painting, and I mean, he just blows me away every time I look at anything he does. And
Yeah, he actually stayed in Bar Harbor.
That's
He worked out on Iron Dot Island.
amazing
Yeah,
stuff.
incredible work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Marin and Fairfield Porter and Georgia O'Keeffe, I mean, just
She
about
was up here?
anybody. She had her time here.
Did she?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one famous painting called The Wave. I think it might be in Worcester. That's from York Beach, one of the beaches in southern Maine. I think she was probably visiting somebody in Algonquin. It's a fabulous painting of just sort of a wave coming in, and then there's one little light, not like a lighthouse, but you don't see the lighthouse, it's just the light in the distance. Yeah.
When I first moved up here, someone gave me the book Paintings of Maine by Carl Little. It's this little book. It's like half the size of a normal book, and I just started flipping through it. This is when I realized there is this great history of people painting all over the state of Maine. And there's an Everett Hopper painting of a rock on Monhegan in there. And there's another book of yours, there's a Caleb Stone in it, this is the little one. You should have made it a bigger reproduction. It would have helped me a lot, because I studied that a lot. But there are so many artists that worked up here that I've stolen little pieces from. Actually, Jamie Wyeth, I met him at an opening one time, and I'd just been at the Farnsworth figuring color things out for how he was doing backlighting on the water for the sparkles, little dots. And I said, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you. I've just been learning some things I'm going to steal from you." And he laughed and said, "Steal from everyone constantly." And it really is like, I feel like that having that history here is great for that. And I don't know, I think it's interesting to think about why Penobscot Bay. I don't know if I think the light here is sort of special, but I don't know how to put a finger on that. And I think it's also just been a great escape. Like, it's close to New York, close enough that you could get here and escape from, you could really, the interest in like the working waterfront and the dramatic coastline. This is where the coast finally starts getting interesting. Like, the whole east coast of the U.S. is pretty flat and boring until you get up to Camden. Sorry, Bar Harbor. Camden's interesting first. But then all the cliffs and rock, it's a really dramatic coastline.
Yeah.
And Marsden, Hartley, the raw honesty of the place is pretty compelling. I think it just kind of goes right to the...
And it's accessible. You can get here. You can move around. You don't feel there's nothing prohibiting you at all to get to places.
Yeah.
No traffic.
Except
Oh,
for
not bad.
No, it's not.
Well, one of the interesting phenomena, and I'd say in the last 30 years, are actually artists living here year-round. That was never really the case. I mean, with some major exceptions. Winslow Homer spent winters in Prouts Neck, but he's one of the rare ones. Marin, Hartley, they all came. Well, Hartley stayed on into the fall, but they basically winter they went back to New York, or they brought their work back there. And that has led to some really wonderful paintings in the book that I'm working on now, the Paintings of Penobscot Bay. There's a number of winter paintings that are just stunning. And, people realizing
The Rockwell Kent
yeah. Well, he's
Dark
another
sky.
exception. He's definitely another exception. He actually committed himself to 3 years out there, I think, and built the house and painted some phenomenal. Those are really cold paintings.
They are.
Yeah.
Well, I was just in New York in April and went to the Winslow Homer show at the Met, and I was just blown away by, they had two very abstract watercolors that he did of Penobscot Bay. They're almost like minimalist, and they're so extraordinary. I was just like, this is Winslow Homer.
Gosh.
Yeah,
I have to find those.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Great. Any other questions or thoughts? Really appreciate your, here we go.
Don't you think that, well, at least having the title Maine artist is so differentiating, especially for the East Coast. There's Western art and there's California art, but on the East Coast, it's Maine art. New England has it, but Maine has this foundation. But you go down the coastline, it's like, you know, New Jersey artists, you know.
Why did I bring New Jersey into it?
Don't have the same cachet, no.
Yeah, but Maine has this, the tagline, you know, Maine artist actually brings all that history with you, even up to, you know, no matter who you are. I just wondered if you all had found that as a, not a marketing thing, but just as a label that you bring into your sales. Or promotion, not sales. Better word.
Yeah. Other
So-
question?
What I've noticed about Penobscot Bay is you don't have an archipelago or front yard anywhere else. I mean, the islands are, you know, a lot of views of vistas of oceans and things like that. But to have these islands there and the lighting that occurs and the fog and the not fog and thin light and light at different angles during the day. I'm a sailor for travel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. The islands, I mean, just that it's nurtures the soul, you know, to look out there at those great, that great archipelago. Looking at one right now. Yeah.
There's such a distinctive sense of place here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say.
Location.
Paintings of Maine led to several other books that Arnold Skolnick ended up doing, the book producer. He did paintings of California. I did paintings of New England with him. He did paintings of New York. And then when they did paintings of the Southwest, because there was incredible energy out there with many of the same painters, Marin and
Yeah, they go there in the winter.
were out there. But it's true, there were great gaps elsewhere. But I think, you know, when I think about Old Lyme and then Gloucester and Rockport and Cape Ann, some of these places, you know, I mean, clearly have a stronger tradition, you know, of painting as any place in Maine. But I would have always felt that Maine was a place apart.
Yeah, for sure.
Good. Thank you very much for coming.